Hello, my name is Elise. I'm the coordinator of the Lake to Lake Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area. And today I'm going to be giving a presentation about invasive species and other invaders that are common in gardens and landscape design plans, and then go over some native plants to help you with your garden design. To briefly touch on what a CISMA is, CISMA is actually the acronym for Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas, and they are groups that work together collaboratively across the state to manage invasive species. So I manage the Lake to Lake CISMA, which is the central Upper Peninsula blue section there. My service area includes Marquette, Alger, Delta, and Schoolcraft counties. And if you're listening today not within that area, obviously the whole state has coverage, and I encourage you to utilize this map to get in touch with somebody in your area if you're looking for resources regarding invasive species management. So the cooperative aspect of a CISMA means that we cooperate with lots of different partners, and all these partners come together with a common management goal of managing invasive species, whether it's for National Park Service, trying to keep our national park areas pristine with native ecosystems, all the way to things like utility companies. If there's invasive species issues on the power lines, it can be detrimental to actual economic resources as well. So there's lots of different partners involved. These are the partners specific to Lake CISMA. So we work with each one of these organizations at different capacities to help them with their invasive species management goals. So in assisting with invasive species management goals, what is it that we do exactly? So we do tracking, treatment, and monitoring. This is to tell us where invasive species are. As you may have remembered from the previous slides, the service area specific to Lake CISMA is the entire central Upper Peninsula. So that is a large area, and if we don't know where invasions are occurring and what species they are and how quickly they're spreading, we're not really getting a good, clear picture of what's going on within our service area. And then knowing where all of these species are, what species they are, how quickly they're moving, etc., helps us in allocating management resources and treatment resources. Once you treat invasive species, we actively work to restore native ecosystems to the best of our abilities, and whether that's doing native planting with native plant plugs, putting down native seed mixes, or doing other management activities, it definitely gives a boost to any management that we have done at a site. And then a huge component of my job is education and outreach, and the CISMA is here to provide resources, whether that's ID information on different species, to help with site plans, or to just do presentations like this and to let people know what's going on, what some up and coming issues may or may not be, and to be that resource for the public regarding invasive species. So now that we've covered what CISMAs are and what CISMAs do, let's jump into the species of concern for this PowerPoint that I'd like to highlight. The first species I'd like to touch on is Hemlock woolly adelgid. This is actually an invasive insect that attacks our native hemlock trees. And it was brought in on infested nursery stock to the United States. Hemlock is very popular, as you can see in this photo, for a landscaping variety, to add trees and height into your landscaping. And it's really great because it's a native tree. So to incorporate it into a landscaping design, you're adding a native tree with all the benefits to our native ecosystems. And unfortunately, there was an instance that brought Hemlock woolly adelgid to Michigan, where some of those trees for landscaping had this insect on it. And so now we are concerned with it being in the state of Michigan. It is a Michigan watch list species. And in the next couple slides, I'll give you some ID tips on how to look at your trees, see if maybe there's something suspicious on it, and then how to report if you think you have found Hemlock woolly adelgid in your area. So as mentioned before, Hemlock woolly adelgid is actually an insect, and it is very, very tiny, as you can see in the bottom right here. That is super zoomed in. These things are almost invisible to the naked eye, and they're really only visible in the wintertime months, where you can actually see in this left-handed picture these little tiny white fluffy blobs, for lack of a better term. That's actually the ovisac of this insect that it creates when it's overwintering and hanging out on trees. And so that's what we use for an ID feature. In the summer, they lose this white fluff, and they go back to just these little tiny dark insects, and so they're very, very difficult to detect. So when you're looking for hemlock woolly adelgid, if you're doing any surveys, it's recommended to do it in the wintertime months, as visually you'll be able to see whether they're there or not much more accurately and much more easily. This insect feeds at the base of the needles, where the needles meet the twig branch, and you will always find them there. They will not be out, any further on the needles. You can kind of see in that left-handed picture, further up that twig from the hand, there is kind of this white fluffy material, but if you notice, it extends actually onto the needles and further away from where the needles meet the branch. That is not hemlock woolly adelgid. The hemlock woolly adelgid will only be found at that intersection, and the insect is set up there and feeding on the sap of the tree. And so what this does is basically literally sucks the life out of the tree. And unfortunately, this infestation has been very prevalent in the eastern United States, specifically in the Appalachian Mountain Range. The Appalachian Mountains have lost almost all of their hemlock to this insect. It's been devastating. You can see that top right photo there. In the landscape, hemlock trees are just no longer really a thing. This insect will attack both mature and sapling trees, so size doesn't really matter. And if you think about that, if there's a infestation on a smaller tree, that tree is probably going to succumb much quicker than some of our mature hemlocks. But this insect does have the potential to decimate mature tall hemlock stands upon infestation if left untreated within 3 to 5 years. This is a map showing an overlay of the eastern hemlock's native range, and then where hemlock woolly adelgid, we've abbreviated it to HWA, where it has been found in the United States. So before 2017, Michigan actually didn't have any known occurrences, but as you can see on this map, and how I mentioned in the previous slide, the Appalachian Mountain area has been heavily impacted by this insect. So in Michigan, it took until 2017 for it to be detected within the state of Michigan. And as you can see, it's limited currently to only that western half of the Lower Peninsula. And there are surveys actively going on right now with my CISMA and the Lake to Lake CISMA, and then CISMAs that cover other sections of the UP, to do early detection surveys, since it is in Michigan and hemlock is such an important resource to our ecosystems up here. We have survey crews out, actually probably as we speak in this cold weather, to look for those white fluffy ovisacs, to hopefully not find any, but if we do, to find them quickly, and so we can contain this outbreak if it is present in the Upper Peninsula. Zooming in a little bit further into specifically the Michigan outbreak, these are two different maps provided by the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources as to where these outbreaks are located. And so you can see it is Mason, Oceana, Muskegon, Ottawa, and Allegan counties downstate. They all line the Lake Michigan shoreline, and fortunately, this insect doesn't do well in cold weather. And so the surveys in the Upper Peninsula are also within the Lake Michigan shoreline border, as the lake kind of moderates that temperature and keeps it just a little bit warmer than some of our inland temperatures. We are hopeful that that means that this insect may only be able to tolerate wintertime temperatures near the shoreline, where that temperature is moderated, and kind of not be able to survive a little bit of a temperature fluctuation on the colder side further inland, and then also potentially in the Upper Peninsula. But we're not going to count on that, and that's exactly why we have surveys out and going, is to be sure that if there is anything surviving elsewhere, that we're catching it early. In these downstate counties, there is also active treatment happening. So not only have they been out there surveying acres upon acres of trees, but when they are finding it, there is active management going on to try to save these hemlock trees. If you have any suspicions that you may have seen hemlock woolly adelgid, or you're concerned about identification or want to know more, there is a reporting follow through to go through. Take pictures of the infestation, how you saw in the previous slides. You know, we flipped up the tree branch and you could see those white ovisacs on the underside of the tree branch. So take pictures, best pictures that you can, and note the location of the tree. It is very important not to take a sample of the tree branch or move it or send it to anybody, as if it is potentially Hemlock woolly adelgid, we don't want to be moving it around any more than necessary. We want to keep it as localized and in place as possible. The first really good place to report it is directly to the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development, and I've included both the phone number and the email address to reach them to report an infestation. You can also report it through the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network. That acronym is MISIN, and they have a handy phone app that actually lets you take a point right through your phone if you're on the app and send the report in, and it will use the GPS location based on where you took the report and sent it from your phone. And then you can always contact me at Lake to Lake CISMA. As mentioned, we're doing those active surveys right now, so if you have anything that looks suspicious or you want a site visit done or some more information, that is exactly why the CISMA is here, to help you with that. So how can you, as a landscape designer or gardener or just even regular citizen, help? You can always buy anything that you would like to source for your landscaping design or yard from reputable, locally sourced nurseries. The less plants have to travel, the less chance they have of picking up something along the way and potentially being infested with something. And then you're also supporting a local business and a local nursery, which is always a good thing. And so keeping your shopping to a local source keeps both infestation potential low and helps out your local economy. So you can also be checking hemlock trees if you do already have them in your landscaping or on your property for those wintertime fuzzy ovisacs. And there's plenty of ID resources on Lake to Lake CISMA's website, on the DNR's website. And if you find anything suspicious, even if it might not be a Hemlock woolly adelgid, if you think it looks funny, call somebody about it. It's always better to have a verification and to have that come back negative and say, nope, it was just, you know, spider webs, or it was fluff from a overwintering bird. You know, there's lots of things that are fuzzy in the trees in the winter, surprisingly. But if it doesn't go reported and all of a sudden we have a really big outbreak, it would have been really good to know where that initially started. So if you see anything suspicious, always report it. It goes a long way in helping us manage this infestation. And then don't move woody material far distances, whether that's firewood, whether that's hemlock tree clippings, whether that's other tree clippings. Anything outside of the recommended 50-mile radius of moving around firewood or any woody material, keeping it as local as possible prevents the spread of any potential insects, other diseases, fungus. There's a lot of stuff that can move around on woody material, so keeping it as close to home as possible is always a good idea. So switching gears from trees into waterways, the next species I'd like to hit on is phragmites. It is a very, very tall plant, as you can see in this photo here. It is a common invasive species found in wetlands and coastal areas. And while it's not really used as a landscaping or garden ornamental, I figured it would be good to touch on just in case somehow it was somewhere in your landscape, and you know how to report it and what can be done about this species. So non-native phragmites was actually introduced very early in the North American settlement process. It came over from Europe in ballast from the ships when we were first coming over to North America. And so it has been here probably the longest time out of any of the non-native species in North America, or at least it's in the top 3. It crowds out native vegetation from wetlands and those coastal ecosystems. It really likes to have its feet wet. And really can impact those wetland ecosystems that are so important for different things like filtering out sediment, uptaking of different toxins, all those good things that we know those wetlands and coastal wetlands do for our native ecosystems. And it can also infiltrate infrastructure systems. We've seen this growing now in some drainage areas, wastewater treatment areas, and it actually has such an intense rhizome system underground that it can actually impact infrastructure. So how you can help mitigate the spread of invasive phragmites is, as always, and with any invasive species, please report it if it is sighted or if you know of some place where it is. Once it is reported, we will check to see if it is the native or non-native variety. There is actually native phragmites in the Upper Peninsula. It is definitely not as prevalent as the non-native variety, and we'll have to confirm which it is. Because if it's non-native, we have treatment options and management options. If it's native, though, we want it there. You know, that is the dominant species that we would like to have on our landscape, is the native variety that's supposed to be there. So there is management options if it's becoming a little bit unruly as the native variety, but it will not be the same treatment options as the invasive variety. As with any invasive species, please do not move it. I have heard stories of people digging it up and putting it places where they want a nice, you know, barrier or a windbreak, or people are always well-intentioned and think, wow, it has this great, really big root system that would be like stream bank stabilization. There are plenty of native plants out there that can do that same function without being an invasive species that could potentially cause more damage in the long run. So with that, plant native wetland alternatives, there are definitely some different alternatives that you can put in to be able to have kind of that same height factor, maybe that privacy factor that you were looking for, but provide really crucial wetland functions. Joe-pye weed is tall. It gets sometimes upwards of 5 feet tall, but it also has this beautiful purple bloom on it. So you're helping pollinator species while still maintaining that height in a wetland plant. So that's a really great option if those were some of the qualities you were looking for in a wet garden area, maybe a rain garden. If you're actually looking for things in the water, bulrushes are wonderful. There's giant bulrushes. They provide that height factor. They also could provide that privacy, but they're a native species that's supposed to be in wetland and wet ecosystems. And native cattails are always a wonderful addition too. They keep that wintertime look going, a little bit of a something to break up all the snow and the ice look in the winter. And so you can have this kind of dramatic look in the winter as well, if that's some of the goals that you were looking for your plantings. The last species I'd like to hit on is a very common landscaping plant that I'm still trying to get the message out of, please don't plant this, and to provide some alternatives that could be planted, and that is Japanese barberry. It is currently still for sale in the state of Michigan. You can go to any nursery store, garden center, and still pick out this plant to put into your landscaping. And people really seem to like it for the wintertime red berries that persist. It turns sometimes this really nice deep burgundy color, as you can see in the bottom left picture there. That kind of burgundy section of the landscaping is all this Japanese barberry. So it can definitely add some visual interest to any landscaping project. However, the berries that it produces are eaten by birds and wildlife, and it actually really upsets their GI tracts, so they don't get very far before the berry is out of their system. And so what this does is takes the berries from your nice controlled landscaping environment and spreads them into the woods where they're not being managed, they're not being cut back, and they can go and just spread very, very rapidly. There's been more and more studies occurring as well that Japanese barberry actually is a really ideal habitat for specifically deer ticks. And deer ticks are the ticks that carry Lyme's disease. And so in the next slide here, when barberry gets into the woods and goes unmanaged and you're not tending it, you're not, taking care of it in your nice landscaping, it can end up taking over an understory of a forest floor and looking like this photo on the right-hand side here. And then the connection with the deer ticks is that if you have an understory looking like this that probably already had ticks to begin with, but now is so much more conducive to harboring deer ticks, you have a greater chance of, in that particular area, having a greater occurrence of Lyme's disease. So this can weirdly wrap around you into a human health issue, and also any animal health issue if you're worried about your animals, your livestock, your pets. Any mammal can be affected by Lyme's disease, so this is definitely something to keep an eye out for. And so when you're looking to plant something that maybe has those same qualities as barberry, you can buy a native alternative. And you can suggest native alternative plantings if somehow you're on beautification committees or a landscaping committee. There's lots of different things that you can put in to reduce the presence of this species in our ecosystems. And then you can always watch for and report barberry in the woods, and that is another way to help. If you stumble across a patch of woodlands that looks like the previous slide and it's crazy infested with barberry, please report that. We'll definitely try to get out there and get some management done. Alternatives to barberry could be something like bayberry. It retains those nice bright red berries throughout the whole winter. As you can see, there's snow on the ground in that picture. And this berry is actually wildlife food. It's very good for birds, little chipmunks, whatever you happen to want to attract to your yard or your landscaping that you would maybe think wants to be attracted by those berries. Bayberry is a great alternative. The same can be said for chokecherry. It also retains its berries well through the fall and into early winter, not quite as long as bayberry will hold on to berries. But it is also a native species, so it is not going to cause that GI upset and cause any issues like the barberry berries will. And then kind of a fun species to maybe incorporate into a landscaping design would be blueberry. It's edible for humans as well, so you could get some fun human edible gardening happening. But blueberries turn the really nice bright red with their foliage in the fall and winter months, so it would also add that pop of color to any landscaping. So the three different plants I talked about all need proper identification to do any of the reporting, where I said, how can you help? Report it. Well, okay, Elise, how do I report it if I don't know what it is? So here are some identification resources. You can always go to Lake to Lake CISMA's webpage, and that's www.l2lcisma.org. And there is a whole page on different species that we're looking out for specific to the central Upper Peninsula. It links you to identification pages, and it also gives you my contact information. If you're ever wondering, what is this plant? Is it native? Is it not native? How can I help? That's what the CISMA, and that is what I am there for. So please feel free to utilize that resource and get a hold of us. That MISSIN app that I talked about, the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network, can be downloaded through any smartphone app stores. And once you get it onto your phone, that is a resource that can go with you places. As long as your phone's on you and has service, you can hit that report button. It also has identification tools built into the program. So if you're not able to get identification prior or resources as you're going, this is a great way to just carry it with you at all times. So if you're interested, take a look at that app. And then you can also go to local conservation districts. You can go to MSU gardeners. There's DNR sites. There's a whole bunch of local resources out there that can help you with your identification goals. And so rounding out this presentation, I'd like to just hit on why should we be gardening with native plants. And so some of the very easy examples are like, well, if it's not Japanese barberry and you plant with one of these native plants, then we don't risk invasions out in the woods. But there's a lot of other things that native plants can bring to landscaping and garden design that are more than just, well, it's not invasive. That's always a very good place to start. But native plants typically require less water and less fertilizer or pesticides than maybe cultivars or other garden plants. They've evolved in the area that you're trying to grow them in if you get native plants native to your area. And so they already know that, hey, it's going to be a really, really cold winter, or hey, this winter is going to be pretty mild. And so they're already adapted to survive those different conditions as to where they are native to. And so with that, they're also ready for what the native pests are. They've evolved to coexist with those. They provide nectar, pollen, and seeds for wildlife, whether it's our wonderful pollinators that need all the help we can give them right now, or if it's birds, and the birds will land on this flower is a cone flower. So in the summer, it's great for pollinator species. In the wintertime, those cones and those seed heads are actually really great for birds, as to come and just kind of have a little mini flower bird feeder. So there's lots of different things that are beneficial to the native environments around you when you're planting with native plants. And it promotes biodiversity. You can also have wonderful knowledge and appreciation of our natural habitats when you add some of our native plants to your backyard. And this is absolutely a personal note, but I think they are beautiful, and I hope you do too. So part of the CISMA's mission is to get more native plants into the ecosystems and into the environment than invasive plants. And so we do that also through having native plant resources. So the Lake to Lake CISMA webpage, again, has an entire section on native plants, native plant resources, databases where you can source these native plants. Conservation districts, again, have an annual tree sale, and they have native trees, native shrubs. I know at least some of the ones in the Upper Peninsula I've seen do native wildflower sales. So if you're looking for local sources for some native plants, those are great places to start. There are also some regional nurseries that supply native plants, and they'll just take a little bit longer to get to you, but still a great resource. The Midwest Invasive Plant Network, the acronym MIPIN, has a database of regional plant distributors and nurseries. So if you're looking for something that maybe your conservation district or another local organization doesn't carry, this database is really great to provide that resource for you. And NRCS also has a pollinator and wildlife habitat guideline, and there are always other resources at state, federal, local, and sometimes even nonprofit levels out there for any gardener who's interested in putting some native plants into the landscape. And with that, I would really like to thank you for your time watching this webinar with me, kind of keeping an eye out for invasive species in our areas, keeping landscaping as invasive free as possible, and for going through this talk with me. If there are any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to take them. You can always email me at l2lcisma@gmail.com. You can give me a call, you can go to the webpage, and if I can't answer your questions or help you, I can always direct you to somebody who can. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from you.